It's always interesting when you're dealing with technology and people that are more or oftentimes less familiar or comfortable with technology. So when you're doing a festival that's fully reliant on it, it gets kind of scary. And you're just kind of like, okay, well, I need everything to go smoothly. And you need to be in a space of bringing in blessings and making sure everything's positive and being positive for that next person so that they're having a good session. So it's really like this, you need to have this, be in a space of equilibrium and full emunah, which is faith, and bitachon, which is trust. And even if something isn't working out, that just trusting that it's not supposed to work out for whatever reason, you can always jump to the next person. So it's tied into a verse in Tehillim, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, which translates as, I placed Hashem before me at all times, and then continues, at my right hand I will not falter. And King David, who wrote or composed a lot of this with a harp, when he holds the Torah on his right hand, he feels Hashem's presence, and that's like a kind of a visual that you can have. And Rabbi Natan actually talks about the linegdi, neged, something coming against you. You can think of it even from that perspective. And the shiviti part, which is hishtavut, which is equilibrium. And if you can exist in this space that it's all the same, everything, the good or the bad, even the bad that is like lineged, coming at you in a negative, that it's all for the good, then you can exist in that equilibrium, in that space that Hashem is before you at all times and you won't falter. So how do you exist in that space? So what you realize is a lot of the things that, these hardships and these different difficulties, there's so much growth that happen in those. When you're in it, you can't really see it. And that's kind of like the struggle of life in general. And we'll talk a little bit about Yaakov and Esav, because this is kind of like the perfect way to look at this. When you're reading these stories and you're not connected to the Kabbalah or the Chassidut of it, you might be reading this story as like, okay, that's nice. Or like, maybe how is it that Esav's all bad and Yaakov's all good? But when you really start to understand, you can understand that Yaakov is the Yetzer Tov and the element that is connected to godliness. And Esav is that which opposes godliness, so representing the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, or the Sitra Achra, the element that opposes godliness. And we could realize, or we can internalize these stories as this is happening in us. Like the Torah isn't just stories, it's actually living inside of us at all times. So with hishtavut, with this living in this equilibrium, then we can live in a space where it's all for the best. And when we're in that space, it is a space of trust, and it is hard to get to. But when we look back at the difficulties that we faced, we realize how much growth has come from them, even though at the time it might have been insanely difficult, whether it's a breakup or maybe some other thing, losing a job and struggling in this other way. A lot of times we could realize, or we could see further down the line, there's like this long-term memory loss. But when we look back, we're like, oh no, it always sort of worked out, Not saying that everybody's rich, but saying that we've been able to make it work, and we exist in wherever we need to be at that moment, but it's always somehow worked out. And when we do look back, we could actually see that growth. And with Yaakov, actually in last parasha, he asks Hashem just for food and clothing. He just wants to be simple. And there's a lot that we could learn from that, because, as Biggie says, more money, more problems, but it's also more possessions, there's more worries. So Yaakov's existing in that space, right? And he's Ish Tam, Yoshevo Alim. So he's a simpleton, but like in a spiritual sense, he's simple. He's, in terms of like understanding and connected to God, he's very great. But in terms of his needs, his physical needs, being attached to those, it's simple and it's not as focused. He's actually in the tent studying Torah, and he's connected fully to Hashem. And what we realize is in this parasha, we jump to a space where he accumulates wealth, because he learns to spiritualize the material. And in the previous space that he was in, his prophecy was actually a lower level prophecy. It happened in a dream, similar to Avimelech, Lavan, Bilam. And the reason Rashi and other commentators bring is because in that space, he was still in the space of, he kind of detached himself from this world, and he wanted to live in his own world. And when Esav would come in, let's say to the tent, he would run out the exit. You know, he wouldn't want to face his problems. He wouldn't want to face anything head on. And that was actually one of the things that was keeping him from the highest spiritual level, even though he was existing in this spiritual state. So in this parasha, we actually see he's, fighting the Satan, the angel of death. He gets into a fight, and then he actually faces Esav. And there's another thing that we can learn from that, because he's not, when he is going to face Esav, he doesn't just pray to Hashem and just trust, just based on his own merit, being a tzaddik, that everything's going to work out for the best. He actually comes up with a plan, and he splits his tribe into two, because he figures, it said that, if your entire prayer won't come true or won't be answered, a part of it would. So he knew, and he had full faith that if one of the camps doesn't survive and something bad happens, at least some of his tribe will survive. And he sent presents and all these different things. And what we learned from that is that you have to do the hishtadlu. You have to do your part. You can't just rely on Hashem. You have to be strategic. And if something's coming to harm you or whatever it would be, you have to do your part to overcome that. And then, of course, the tefillah is the thing that's going to make it the most successful. But really, when he does this, when he faces Esav, and when he's living in this world, and it's also said that when he says, he's trying to put the message, he sends a messenger to Esav that to let Esav know that I lived in the house of Lavan. He lived there for 20 years. Lavan was an idol worshiper. And he says, I came out with donkey and ox, I believe he's saying. And with this, he's basically telling Esav that there's two different strategies here. One is that he's saying, I lived for 20 years in the house of an idolater, and it didn't do anything to me bad. Like, I'm still connected. I'm even higher spiritually connected. So there's nothing that you could do to take me away from my connection with Hashem. And the other thing was saying that, I walked out with this, that's a sign of wealth, basically, like your cattle and all these different things. And he's saying that not only did he come out on top in terms of his spirituality, he also came on top with material goods. So Esav took this, and he realized also that, that Yaakov's good. He passed this test, and so he's going to pass any test. He's walking with Hashem. But also, in terms of what Esav would want, he would want way more than that. I mean, that for Yaakov, that was enough, because Yaakov doesn't strive for that. That's not his goal. His goal isn't material belongings. So it was also telling Esav that the birthright, the blessing that I got, I'm still in my own humble situation. So Esav doesn't have to worry that he didn't miss out on something, because Esav, his bechina, what Esav would want, is completely insatiable. He would always want more. And Yaakov's saying, what I have, I'm happy with, but what I have, you would never be happy with. So really what we learn with the level that Yaakov gets to, and I'm looking at my book right now, Light of the Infinite. This is the Genesis of Light. And this festival, it's the third festival, but it actually celebrates my book, The Exodus of Darkness. And this one is going to be, paralleling Exodus and Shemot. And really just thinking about the Exodus of Darkness, right? Esav and Yaakov, Esav's representing the body, Yaakov representing the soul. And our body and soul are always at odds, right? But the idea, when we read in Shema, B'chol levavchem, is to unify your Yetzer Hara, Esav, and your Yetzer Tov, Yaakov, and to take your Yetzer Hara and have it basically work for your Yetzer Tov. And that's the same with your body. You can use that, and the same way with material objects that you could look at as something bad, whether it's your phone and, there's like Instagram and all these distractions, but you could also use it for something good, like this festival, like all the people who are involved in it, presenting and sharing inspirational Torah all the time, right? And this exodus of darkness, this leaving, we see Yaakov, he's called Yaakov, the Ekev. He's holding on to this heel of Esav, because as we read, one will always overpower the next. So the ascent of one will cause the descent of the other. So Yaakov is taking that heel and he's trying to get to the Rosh, and that Ratzon to get to that Rosh so that he could become Israel. And he doesn't become Israel till he fights the angel, till he lives in this world, till he materializes, till he spiritualizes the material, until he faces Esav. Because he goes from being in the tent and being basically isolated, connected to Hashem, but what we see is that becoming Israel and Bnei Israel, all the children of Israel and all the tribes come from when Yaakov actually goes out of the tent, goes into the world, faces his challenges, faces his brother, faces the angel of death, and wins. And when we take these material objects and turn them into spiritual, when we take food and say a blessing on it and connect it back to its source, to Hashem, and then use that sustenance and that energy and change that and uplift it and elevate it into Torah and mitzvot and doing good and living in our divine purpose, that is when we can reach the highest level. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that it's not about avoiding darkness. We need to transform it. We don't need to avoid darkness. We need to transform the darkness into light. And that's the idea of the exodus of darkness. We're leaving that. When we aren't doing that, then we feel disconnected, right? Because if we're living in the darkness, then we feel disconnected and we feel dissonant. But if we're transforming and elevating the darkness into light, then we're actually in harmony with ourselves, with our divine purpose, and with those around us. And loving, I always say that the word ahava, which is the Hebrew word for love, the root of the word is hav, which is give, which really teaches us that loving is synonymous with giving. And we see this most clearly with the unconditional love. You know, the most unconditional love is through a parent and their child, and we know with Hashem and Bnei Israel. And the reason is because that child could not survive without their parent, and the parent knows that, and they're constantly giving, in a sense, life to this child just by attending to the child at all moments, feeding the child, and every need is taken care of because the parent is taking care of that. And if you think about that, that's the ultimate giving, right? So that creates this connection, this unconditional love. And you can't really get that in a regular relationship because most relationships, you can't replicate this situation that with a parent to child. Maybe eventually in a romantic one in some sense, but it still doesn't really come to the level of a parent and child. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Basically that the love and the light and the exiting of the darkness and reaching the light through love and judging everything favorably and taking these material objects and doing the mitzvot and elevating everything back to its divine source. That's how we could exist in the space of love for ourselves and for those around us. And when we do that, we could connect everybody back to their divine purpose and to Hashem. And hopefully that will bring the final redemption. Bimhera v'yameinu. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you to all the presenters for being a part of this. I mean, I would list everybody, but there's so many epic ones and I don't want to leave anybody out or single anybody out. But it's archival, so you could check it out, lightofinfinite.com/fest. And then it's going to also be on YouTube. So just, you could type in Light of Infinite on YouTube. Definitely subscribe because I'm posting things throughout the week. There's going to be some epic classes there. And yeah, just thank you so much for tuning in and all the support and helping spread this light. Much love.